Hey, everybody. What's up? We are back with another episode.
Yes, we are New World Nomads. We're a network of creators, curators, and developers who champion explorations in emerging technology that focus on the human experience.
We amplify the voices and visions of creative entrepreneurs committed to multicultural collaborations at the intersection of art, commerce, and wellness.
As we move into a new era where technology and humanity are becoming intertwined, we're here to question the possibilities, confront the complexities,
and empower people to shape the landscape of this new world.
Episode 2.
Yeah. Everybody who listened and gave us some feedback, thank you. We're really excited. And just know, if you're listening now, if you're tuning in now, if this is your first episode, this is a new endeavor for us.
Yep.
So we want to hear what feels good for you guys, what's working, what you're interested in, what you want to hear about, and then we're going to incorporate things every week. So this week, we are incorporating some music. So we're going to have some live musical performance. As you just saw, I just did something, and then at the end of this episode, Seg is going to do something for you.
Yes, sir.
And then we're also going to try to keep we're going to try, because we could talk
forever and ever.
Forever and ever and ever. We talk like two old ladies, I feel like.
We go on for a little while.
Really long.
It's because we got good topics and we got a lot to say.
I know,
we got lots
it's
of
true.
Thoughts.
Good. Self-justifying.
You know?
We like that.
Yeah,
Keep it confident. For this episode, I was really passionate to talk about ownership. Ownership is obviously something that's a very vast topic, and it's something that affects so many of us in different ways. Whether you are someone who identifies with emerging technology or Web3 or any of that or not, ownership is still something that's affecting your life. You are showing up in some way in this world, you are working, you are creating things, you are contributing things, and a lot of the times you are not owning what you show up and you work for or with or what you're a part of. And other times you might actually own some of it, but we all have these sort of complex conversations or not conversations that make us get into like legal battles or, long disputes or things that stay unresolved forever.
Right.
So I know that you said you have something to talk. I said I want to talk about ownership, and then Seg kind of like went away, and he was like, "I got some things to say about ownership."
Well, because it's a tricky subject,
It
right?
is.
Because there's so many different nuances. I think that like as a creative, if you create something, you want to have ownership of it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that part of the reason why like a lot of folks got into Web3 was because of that, right? Because the idea that you own your whatever it is you create, whether it's your art, your music, whatever it is, you own it. And when you sell it on the blockchain, you can even have a royalty share. Well, there's been questions around that, right?
Yeah.
Because now that's kind of going away, at least with some platforms. So the idea of long-term ownership, like what does that mean? Once you've sold your piece, you no longer have any percentage of that. You don't get any piece of that if it gets resold or anything along those lines. And then if you're involved outside of Web3 in a variety of projects, and I know that you've been involved in several projects, you know, where does the ownership lie when you have lots of people involved in a creative project? Who owns what? You know, that can happen when it comes to songwriting. It can happen when it comes to making videos or films. Or, it gets very, very tricky and confusing.
Yeah.
And there's legal stuff, and then there's also the question just around like, well, what's right and what's wrong? Right?
Yeah, that ethical sort of assumption, and everyone has different takes on that. Yeah. And also just for anybody that has no interest in Web3 or is not at all connected to Web3, even now I feel like it's completely relevant. Like, I feel like Facebook probably owns all my high school photos, right? Because the ownership of me uploading it, I signed that away, basically. Absolutely. Instagram happening all the time.
Absolutely.
Any of Web2, you know, platforms, even, again, like, I think Spotify and all of these other music streaming platforms sold it as like, ooh, now the artist will get to be in more control and have more ownership over their insert blank, whatever it is. But you don't actually have more ownership, because it's like that sort of, you know, it feels like indentured servant.
Yeah.
You know, like where it's like you're born into like, you will get this land in this amount of years after this amount of work, and then you calculate it up and you're like, I'll be dead for so many years by the time I own that thing.
Yep.
So I'm just working towards nothing with the promise of everything.
Yeah.
You know some of the ones I've been dealing with.
I know you got an example, and I have some thoughts. So maybe you should start with your example.
That one, and then
because I have some thoughts about it.
Okay, so this is really tricky, and I'm really interested to hear what everybody has to say about it, because I think it's so many angles. So lately, I've been doing a lot of different creative collaborations, and then one specifically came into my life. This whole music video shoot sort of had this big sort of like rotten foundational piece at the center of it. It had beautiful people, incredible art, so much talent, and a lot of really well-meaning people. The rotten thing at the center of it was that the two main people who had sort of kicked off the collaboration did not have a clear, transparent conversation about the terms of the collaboration.
Okay.
So there was never a very, very, very clarifying conversation of like, yo, this is my project. Will you work on this with me? If so, how much is that going to cost? Yep. What that's going to look like, right?
That part is important.
And so many of us don't do that. Like, we've been making music for, have we ever? We don't.
Because there's a level of trust.
Exactly.
Right.
And so sometimes people have that presumed level of trust.
Right.
And then you get into these sticky areas. So anyway, they did not have the same perspective. One of them thought, okay, I am asking you to do this because it's my music. And I'm asking you as a visual artist to be part of that as a director. And I'm financing it. So those were those two things that like the person was like, this is my music. I'm creating a visual for my music, and I'm going to finance it. So the presumption was, I will own this. This is my video. And then the director did not see it that way. The director had it in like, okay, we're going to create something, and then we're going to co-own whatever that thing is that we create. Of course, you'll still own your music, but we're going to co-own the thing that we create. Neither of those perspectives is right or wrong, right? But how things unfolded, in the long story short of it, is that it got so messy that in the middle of the shoot, all of these energies were weird and the dynamics were weird, and there was like kind of, you know, some things that felt like dishonesty or distrust, like all that triggered stuff that can happen when you're creating things. And then we ended up having this full-blown mediation with like all the people involved, trying to understand like, can we come to an agreement? But we were so far down the line that it just felt like impossible to resolve.
Yeah.
And so I was just sitting there, you know, when you have those zoom out moments in life where you're just like, this is so fucked up, because everyone had really good intentions, but at the end of it, the other part of it, which I want to get into with you, is that what I felt so uncomfortable about is like, you know, I'm a Pacific Islander. I'm a mixed race person, but I come from an indigenous culture that was essentially like disappeared and whitewashed out of history. Still is. Hawaii is illegally occupied by the United States today. So I'm very aware of what it's like to have like colonialism and white culture come and appropriate and basically just reclaim your shit. Own your shit, right? But I'm white passing because I don't have color in my skin like that. So I have a certain level of privilege in my life that has been this very interesting thing to navigate, because like my grandma's brown. So much of my life narrative has been about like that lack of privilege, but then I was born with this privilege. And then I end up in these situations like this one where I had this zoom out where I was like, it's so messed up that the other artist, who was also the one who financed it, and it was her music, she's also mixed race, also white passing. The director, mixed race, not white passing. And so it just felt like, damn, because this makes it feel so much worse.
That element.
You know, because what I was saying is like, you know, the mixed race artist who is not white passing has already had a worse time in this industry. She's already been mistreated, and she's already probably had way more people come and screw her out of her ownership.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we all haven't, because I have too, but we know that it's been more for her and the other two people who she brought to the project, who are also like, they're people of color.
Yeah.
So it's like, we know that it's worse on that side for anybody who's gone through that. However, that doesn't make the dynamics of what happened in the situation either right or wrong on either side, because there were things done in both directions that were complex.
Yeah.
But why I wanted to have this conversation is because I was like, when I had that zoom out moment, I was like, how much of our experience of ownership now and our distrust of each other is also influenced by what this system that we're a part of has forced us to go through. Because she was so much more livid about the fact that she felt like she was being screwed out of this ownership, because of course, like she was saying, like, this is the shit that always happens. Like, right. This is what always happens. And I was in this weird position because I felt like, actually, ethically, the way I saw her move as a human without anything else connected to it, I didn't actually feel like she deserved the ownership over the project that she wanted, having nothing to do with culture, color, nothing. Just like human movements, choices, right. Integrity. But I was in this really bizarre position because I felt like I could understand it from every angle. And I'm still feel like, as you can tell, it's like, I don't really know how I feel about all of it. But what I did know was like, yo, we need to have a clearer sense for ourselves of like having these conversations, being super transparent, and just saying at the very beginning, from the jump with someone, who's going to own this? Yeah. What is this going to mean? Yeah, sure, you're paying for it, but just because you're financing it doesn't automatically mean that you own it. We need to still have that conversation. Yeah. You know?
I think it gets really, I think the first thing is it needs to be an upfront conversation in the beginning. Like, yeah. That's just like the first thing before anything goes down. Have the conversation. Hey, what's going to happen? Like compensation, all of that stuff. And then ownership. Who can do what with this? Yeah. Because I think when it comes to, especially like a lot of independent projects, a lot of folks who are doing the work, sometimes they'll be willing to do things for a little bit less. Yeah. You know, I don't know what was
exactly. You know, it was that kind of thing too.
So that's yes. part of it, right? So if someone's like, all right, I'm not going to be compensated at the rate I would normally do. I'm bringing people on who I'm paying less, or I'm getting favors that I'm pulling. Yep. And what I'm getting out of it is I'm going to have ownership of this. I'm going to be able to use this for my portfolio. I'm going to be able to use this however I want to use it, you know. As a creative, as an artist, I can put it out. If I have a show or whatever it is, I can highlight that. So I understand where that's coming from, and I think from a legal perspective, this is the thing that I just found out about. I think from a legal perspective that if the director, you know, if the director, the photographer, in a situation like this, has ownership of the thing, so they think that they have the legal rights to own it, and that what would be happening in this case would be essentially like licensing it to the artist that they're working for. That is what I just read this.
Wait, okay, so quick question though, because when we were having this mediation, actually what the director said was that the DP, because the DP is the one who shot it. Yep. She was like, technically, he DP owns it.
That's actually correct.
Right.
That's
so
actually
that
exactly
it, right?
The legal.
And so luckily, see,
whoever's
in this
shooting
situation,
it owns it.
Fortunately for the musician, the DP was being paid by her. And so he therefore also agreeing in the way that she moved was then agreeing that the ownership was with her. So that's why that all went that way. Okay. Yeah.
It gets really complicated. But the way that what I'd heard was that essentially if you shoot it, no matter what circumstances, so if you bring on a DP or a photographer for just a shoot for anything like that, like even if you come up with the concept, even if you come up with the entire thing, even if you just even if it's your vision, if you're literally the one you You hire the makeup artist. You tell them how to do it. You stylize everything. And they just simply are there and take the photos or take the video of it. They still own it.
Oh, well, now I'm mad. Because, by the way, if people have opinions and stuff on it, because, okay, let me quickly, I don't want to, like, dominate this conversation.
No.
But what's crazy is I just had this other situation where there's a really dope human being, also a photographer, reached out to me on IG because we met before. And she was like, yo, let's collaborate. And I said, I'm down, bet. I had all this idea for the creative direction. I sent references. Like, I'm going to craft and create all the stuff I'm wearing because it's wearable art. And then she was going to shoot. She had an idea for where we could shoot. And then when we were talking, because I went through this other drama, I talked immediately about ownership. And she said, well, unless you pay me, I consider that I own whatever we create. Unless, obviously, she said, you can use it, but you don't own it. And I was like, oh, no, that's not going to work for me. I said, if you're down to do like a 50-50 shared split of the ownership, so we co-own it, and then we can make an agreement so that we have a conversation. Let's say like I get an opportunity to showcase in something and we decide we both want the images there, then we'll do it. So it's like down the middle. You can't use it for some random purpose that I'm not connected to. And basically she was like, no.
Yeah, and I think that legally she has the standing in that case. Even if like, yeah, it's crazy because even if someone say like, you know, give an example of someone taking like wedding photos, whatever that you choose or whatever, like the photographer still owns those, still has the rights to those, even though they're your wedding photos, unless you set in place a specific agreement that says, I'm hiring you and I'm taking ownership of this and you're agreeing to transfer this over to me, which you can do, which you can discuss ahead of time. But if the photographer takes it,
it's that agreement beforehand.
It's the agreement beforehand. And so I think that in the case... if you
don't have that, then they have the right. I'm not saying that's wrong either, though, right? Because I feel like in a lot of instances, that's probably protected people very fairly.
Right.
It just seems crazy to me that there's a generalized rule of thumb about that.
Yeah.
And where does that come from? Is that some, like, colonial shit? Because, like, basically cameras and all of that were used as, like, you know, weapons of, honestly, of, like, colonization in a way, because the way that things were documented and presented and captured were actually... you know, like created by the leverage of like colonizers. And so therefore they protected legally that sort of colonizing role, even if it's someone now who is like an anti-colonizing role, if they're embodying someone who's been marginalized.
I think if, I don't know exactly, but I think if you go back historically, probably people who had access to these tools were probably in a better position than people who didn't have access to these tools, right? So like they were, when they were, I'm sure, drafting this stuff, were leveraging themselves so that they were going to be in a position of power and control over the stuff.
How much does the emotional, psychological, spiritual experience of ownership play into this? Because I think, again, people that have had, you know, privilege or essentially a state of luxury in terms of like, you know, entitled position over other people, it's very easy for them to claim ownership because they've been raised around people who claimed ownership and just assumed ownership all the time.
Yeah.
I think it's harder like for anything, if you're a person of color, if you're a woman, if you're whatever, there's all these different factors that also play into you psychologically feeling like you have the right to like talk about your ownership, even at a company, you know? And I think that that's something that's actually not that off the table, but for some of us, we just assume that it's completely off the table because it wasn't modeled to us. Like nobody around us, like my parents had businesses that they started, but it was very like child of immigrant, like making things work. And then that's a lot of times the success that they did get was associative success. So like working your way up a thing that you didn't own, or like working for people, like they were your clients, but they still had like more of the money, the wealth, and the power.
Right.
So what you owned was still like a fraction of, you know, like the pie in general. Yeah.
And I think that's a thing that a lot of folks negotiate with, as far as like, as an artist, as a creative in any kind of area you're in, you know, like, do I do the thing that the corporate thing where I'm willing to,
which you did for like 17 years.
I did for a long time, right? And it's comfortable, it pays well, it's consistent, it has all the benefits of working for a large company that you get. You know, it's nice being able to expense things and to have travel paid for and to have lunch and things like that. It's nice to have those things, but you don't own anything. At the end of it, it's like, all right, I left and like I don't leave with anything. Versus creating your own thing, building your own thing, where, okay, well, it's going to be a little bit scrappy for a while. It's going to be, you're not going to have stuff you can just expense and, you know, like, but you own all of your stuff and you have to believe in that, that whatever it is that you're producing, that you're creating has value that at some point you're going to be able to monetize to a level that you'll be at, or, you know, or exceed, which I think that the heights, you know, the potential for the heights are a lot greater than if you just stay at a corporation where they're going to continually keep you in a position where you're going to be comfortable, but, you know, not too comfortable, right? Like they want to keep you there. So you're like, all right, don't leave, but like, we're not going to pay you excessively. Whereas if you do your own thing, you have the potential to skyrocket, right? But you also have the potential to completely bottom out, right? And so I think
everyone's like, yeah, that's the point. That's
yeah. And I think that's the tricky thing when it comes to ownership, and it's come up a lot, like in not just in this area, but in terms of like music and stuff like that as well. And a lot of people, I think the ideal that people champion is always own all of your stuff, right? Especially the music industry. People kind of like nowadays, like kind of clown artists who don't know much about their publishing and things like that. And I've seen interviews where people have been like, oh, you don't know about your publishing. And there's two different routes. I think that like, obviously there's labels and things that have like traditionally screwed over artists. But there's also label deals that work for people, right? There's also situations that where people have smaller ownership, and it's kind of like would you rather have 100% of something that's worth nothing, or like 1% of something that's worth $1 billion, you know? And so there are situations in which it might be in people's interests to be in a situation that's got corporate backing, where they have some sense of security. They don't own 100% of what they have, but they're part of a team and working with folks where they're bringing external value and other things that will only bring the brand up and raise the value of it. So it's one of those things where, like, obviously not every situation is different. There's some situations where people just being screwed. And there's situations where if you come to a label or you come to a corporation with a certain amount of value that you've already created, whether it's like IG following or, you know, success you've already had, well, then obviously you're in a better position to be able to leverage the kinds of ownership stake that you want to have that, you know, maybe someone who hasn't done that can't afford to do. So it's tricky, and I don't think it's a one size fits all for every artist. I think everyone's got to kind of figure out exactly what it is.
Like my sort of, again, I feel like we're gonna leave you with the tie up of a bunch of unanswered questions. But I feel like if there's one thing I would want people to walk away from listening to this today, it's what I've heard in a lot of financial courses, which is like, understand your position. Yeah. You know, like, understand your position. And in order to understand your position, you have to know, like you said, what am I bringing to the table? That can even be in non-tangible things. So like if you feel like your creative mind and the way that you concept things out, or what you're bringing in terms of an idea or a narrative is super valuable, like, just decide that and know what that value is. That's part of your position. If you know that what you don't have is like distribution or marketing or production resources or whatever, like, understand that's part of your position. Right. And really be honest with yourself about what you feel like your position is, because that's what allowed me in the situation with this photographer to say, yo, dope. Understanding my position, I still feel comfortable, as much as I'd love to create with you, to say no thank you and walk away from that.
It's a conversation that more and more artists, I think, should be having, and whatever side you fall on, you know, like I said, like, I think that there is this era that we're in now, which really, really champions ownership, which I understand, and I'm all about ownership. But I also don't like begrudge the folks who are like, you know what, I don't have marketing, distribution, I don't have these things, and if I don't work with this company that's going to provide some of that, and I give up some of my ownership of that, like, you know, they're comfortable with that, right? They're comfortable to make that kind of exchange. So I think as long as people are like that, the big thing is like not having the kind of like, you know, having like the rug pulled from under you, like, understand what's going to happen. Yes. If you're comfortable with it, you know, like, I don't think everyone's being screwed. I think there's certain people who are kind of like, I'm content with this situation. You can call me screwed, but I'm successful. I've got a song that's on Billboard. I've got this out, and I'm gonna be able to leverage that to something better down the line. And you know, everyone can make their own choices when it comes to ownership. Especially nowadays, when it comes to music, you see now there's like tons and tons of artists who are selling their entire catalogs. Yeah. Right, because there's a lot of folks. I think Future just sold his catalog for around like $70 million, like a few months ago, and. Yeah, like, props to him. I just saw, I think Diplo also sold his catalog, and it's like, some people are saying, well, why are you selling this? This is the ownership of it. It's like, well, I could
he
continue.
understood his position and he knew what he wanted out of that.
And he wanted the cash now, right? It's like, all right, I could hold on to my catalog, and my kids and grandkids and great grandkids will continue to make money in perpetuity, or I could make 70 million now and invest the money how I want to for my kids and grandkids.
Yeah.
And so, understanding in those cases, they're like, well, I created this stuff so that I could get to a level where my ownership would be worth something.
Right.
And now it's worth something. And now I'm making that money. It wasn't always about just having ownership for the sake of ownership.
Yeah.
So, as long as people, again, are willing to have those conversations and understand it, I think that's the biggest thing. And then, again, ideally beforehand, before going into any kind of agreement or any kind of creative exploration, having those conversations with everyone involved and being like, okay, what value are you getting out of this? How much does ownership matter to you? How much does it matter to me? Where can we come to some common ground?
Yeah.
Because that stuff, like you said, often doesn't happen, and then you get, in kind of dicey situations.
So I think having the conversation first with yourself in terms of what is my balance that I need in order to feel like this is worth my time, my energy, that I'm not going to have resentment or bitterness or feel like I got swindled. Because essentially it is a deeper sort of spiritual conversation, right? Just like anything having to do with money and value and all of that is. It's like, how much do you actually feel like your own preferences are important to be centered in your life, and that you actually believe that you have the right to ask for that?
Yeah.
And it's hard because so many of us grew up being taught that if we asked for what we felt like we needed or deserved, that we would be turned away or, essentially rejected or lose our opportunities. So I feel like if anyone's listening and they're, experiencing, maybe you have your own also anger or resentment around ownership conversations, I would say just being on more the sort of energetic perspective of things, I would say do as much as you can to try to clear that shit out, because there's so much stuck energy that happens when we hold on to like the rage and resentment of having felt like we've been robbed or, experienced theft in some way.
Yeah.
And I say this again, that, so much of my ancestral narrative has been that we are, this tiny forgotten underdog culture that, got sort of essentially like robbed and pushed out and all of that. I grew up in an environment where I was like always the poorest kid. I was that, again, like multicultural. Where is that person from? We can't pronounce her name. Like other different, not part of like what felt like the successful, popular, whatever kids,
Yeah.
And that narrative has been so deep in my life because I essentially have felt that battle of like, I feel this natural right to own and be a part of things, but then also this sort of like shame layer around like, oh, but I'm not wanted like that, or I don't have the right to like assert myself like that. And I've done a lot of work to move through it and process it, but I was recognizing that there was still like some little lingering things there. Like for me, why that situation, just to bring it full circle to the project I was a part of, why that felt heartbreaking was there wasn't any big entity or conglomerate that was running the show. There wasn't anyone who was sort of like, benefiting off of. My cat has some things to say. There wasn't anyone like that's benefiting off of us, but we still were in this fucked up place together where we were now mimicking the systemic corruption values that we've been exposed to upon each other.
Yeah.
And we all could see it. Like we all could see it, and it was all upsetting for everyone, and yet we still, because we'd gone too far down that path, like there was no clean way out of it.
Yeah.
So I feel like having this conversation and hoping that it just puts a little bit of like a bug in people's ears, that instead of feeling like, oh, I got to protect myself and I'm not going to trust anyone, like just be transparent. I feel like instead of being distrustful, be transparent, because that's the most important thing that any sort of project needs, whether if it's, a corporate project or a purely creative project, is to be really transparent about the terms of like what you're willing to do or not do, what you expect out of it and don't expect out of it. And essentially ownership is hand in hand with like accountability. Yeah. Because a lot of people want to own stuff, but then they're not willing to show up for the accountability. And that's why I felt like in this situation, the director did have rights in what she wanted to own, but her accountability wasn't matching her desire for her ownership. So just because as human beings who create and contribute, we are actually entitled to a certain amount of ownership, in my opinion. However, I don't think that you can actually activate that entitlement without your willingness to have the accountability behind it, because it's kind of like just saying a thing instead of doing a thing. You have to say the thing, like this is what I expect, and then do the thing that allows for that to happen. And then I think that we deserve the ownership that we've set out to preserve for ourselves.
I think that's right. And I think that that level of accountability, I think some of that also comes from just understanding who you're dealing with, right? Like, so like making
Which
sure
you don't always know.
You don't always know. But like doing your best in terms
your
of
due diligence
partnership. Yeah. You know, whether that's like, checking whether the folks who've collaborated with people in the past, not just on the quality of work, which I think is the first thing people will do is like, oh, look at this person's real.
Yeah.
Oh, they're amazing. But the relationships were like, what was the contracts like? Yeah. How did that smooth? Because a lot of times, you get great products and things like that, but the interactions itself weren't great.
Yeah.
Or the terms weren't great.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we've seen numerous artists put out great, amazing, high quality work, but then later on we hear like this person's really, really unhappy. This situation was terrible. This was a horrible deal, and it doesn't matter.
Long friendships get split up because of basically just don't do anything without a contract in 2023. Like, it's 2023. I don't care if it's your boyfriend, whatever. You're shooting something, just a 1-page agreement. Doesn't have to be a crazy thing, but just a 1-pager that's like, we both mutually consent to, Chat GPT can help you write it. Chat GPT can help you write it. Just be like, write a thing. Me and my boyfriend are going to go out and take some pictures, and we might make an NFT or post them or whatever. And I just need something that acknowledges that we're going to share this together, or whatever we decide, 70-30% or whatever. Yeah. Put your terms in a piece of paper.
Can I do that for a first date for like who's paying for dinner? Like, can I have like a joint ownership?
You're going to lose a lot of date time to be like, screw that guy. But again, okay, really quick sidebar. I know we were trying to keep it short. It's so hard with us. But I think what's super fascinating about you saying that as a throwaway is that is actually such a big part of it, right? Like, as a woman, I have been in those situations in my younger years where I went out with a man because he paid for dinner. He literally just assumed like he owned sex now. That happened. Yeah. And that happens all the time, as we know. We've talked about this too, where it's like, you've said, like, you've been around other dudes where it's like, if he buys a girl drinks all night and then she decides not to go home with him, he literally feels like, I owned that right. I bought that right. I owned it. And it's like, did anyone ever say that? Was that ever whatever, but because of, again, the conditioning around it, and because we always assume that money is connected to the ownership of the thing, it creates these crazy situations where then people can just give over their ownership. And again, non-consensual, but also unspoken. Yeah. So it has this really difficult, how do you even separate, who was right or wrong in those kinds of situations? Yeah. So I feel like that's why now, the same way that people are talking about consent so much, I feel like creative consent needs to be really centered in the conversation, the same way that if you're friends with someone and then you guys decide to start sleeping together and that consent conversation still exists. Right. I feel like as creatives, even if you're friends and you start making something, please have the conversation. I'm sorry if it feels weird, but just be like, yo, bro, like.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's the same in every situation. It's kind of like whether it's a dating situation or it's a collaboration. It's like, clarity, have the awkward conversation, right? Because no one wants to have the conversation of like, what are we looking for? Exactly. Like, what are we? Yeah. Like, no one likes those. It would be kind of weird though if on a date, like at the very beginning, you were like, so who's gonna pay for dinner? Because I feel like we haven't really reached that point yet. And there are some like established standards that like the dude's paying for. It is established. So there are some of those things, but at least an understanding of like, oh, what is it that you want? What is it that you're looking for? So that you can get an understanding of, do we want similar things or we don't want similar things? Yeah. I mean, if you're the dude and you figure out pretty quickly, we don't want similar things, we're not vibing, then okay, well
cancel
then maybe you don't get the lobster, maybe you don't get the dessert, Oh
my God. Okay, before we dig ourselves into an even deeper hole of controversies, I think we're gonna go. But I think we're gonna listen to you do a song.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I also did want to say that even though we're not going to necessarily have music that relates directly to what we're talking about, because in some way we like art for art's sake, and we're just going to have different artists come through, us included, sharing music. I do feel like what was really interesting about the song that I chose to sing today, and then I'll just give sort of like a future nod to the one that you're doing, is they're very internally focused songs.
Yeah.
Like mine is literally about like entering this sort of inner space, no matter what chaotic things are going on around you. And I feel like yours is.
Yeah. I mean, mine's about, you know, like searching for home within yourself, right? Like not the idea of some external validating idea of home, but like finding home within yourself.
Yeah.
Which I think does tie into the conversation we've been having, which is
yes.
essentially like determine your own values,
yes.
what matters to you,
yes.
you know, and always have that in mind whenever you go into any situation, whether it's a relationship
yes.
or whether it's like a collaboration.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, exactly. And I think that to me is actually the kind of the theme of, I know, because I know us, that you and I actually do have very similar values, but also different values in other areas. But we didn't spend this episode talking about that because the purpose is not try to get your values to line up with everyone else's values, or try to get everyone else's values to line up to yours. Because to me, that's like a maddening, just endless battle.
Yeah.
It's the anti-humanity to try to align everything so that you are going to agree directly and completely with whatever is going on around you.
Not realistic.
But the most that you can hope for is like to harmonize, right? It's not like play the same note as me. But, okay, I'm going to play this note, you play this note, and we can harmonize. And if we don't harmonize because we're not in the same key, then it's like you said, it's like know enough to be like, this probably isn't, I'm not going to push ahead and do this anyway. Because like those notes together sound like a nightmare. Yep. And I feel like in order to do that, people need to really have a sense of confidence that your own particular, your frequency, your vibe, your energy, your worth, your value, your creativity, whatever it is that you bring, that has its own worth and value. And I think a lot of people, we're stripped of that when we're really young for all different reasons. And that idea of ownership in the world really does start with like ownership of yourself. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Okay, well, we'll close out with your song.
Yes.
Yeah.
You won't know home until you taste what it's like to never rest. It's harder to find peace when you're at war with yourself. Before you find home, you'll find something else.
Home. All of my own on this road trying to make my way home. I'm going home hoping that take the pain away. Home. No looking back cause it don't hit the same today. Change in a major way. Pray that I may okay. People gon' say what they wanna say. I can control what's in front of me. All these vampires keep calling me. Chasing me down and confronting me, hunting me. Suddenly something keep pulling me home. I'm moving fast case they follow me home. Try not to panic, I'm breaking that habit and facing the ultimate challenge. I'm going back home.
What it's like to never rest. How do you find peace when you're at war with yourself? Before you find home, you'll find something else.
Please, guys, more feedback, ideas, inspirations. We will have guests coming soon.
Yes. Awesome guests.
Yes, a lot of good things. And meanwhile, we will see you on the next one.
Take care.